I am Simone, 32 years old, and my parents wiped out their entire life savings to bail my older brother out of trouble for the 13th time. When the bank finally came for their house, they drove through a torrential storm to my property, fully expecting to take over mine. They stood on my porch with 6 suitcases demanding I sign away my peace, my home, and my sanity. My father actually put his hands on me to force his way inside. I shoved him right back into the pouring rain. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth and tried to use guilt as a weapon. The rain was coming down in sheets that night, hammering against the massive windows of my lake house in Lake Oconee. It was past midnight, and the storm had already knocked out the power on the main road. Inside, I was perfectly safe, wrapped in the quiet sanctuary I had built for myself. At 32, I was a successful corporate financial consultant and commercial real estate investor. I bought this $1.5 million property with my own money, my own sweat, and my own sleepless nights. It was my fortress. But a fortress is only as strong as its gates, and tonight, my family was trying to batter theirs down. The heavy, frantic pounding on my custom oak front door startled me. Nobody drives out to Lake Oconee in a severe thunderstorm unannounced. As I walked down the curved staircase, my security system chimed. I pulled up the camera feed on my phone and felt my blood run completely cold. Standing on my covered porch, soaked and shivering, were my parents, Warren and Valerie. Beside them sat a mountain of expensive luggage, 6 massive suitcases that looked entirely out of place in the driving rain. Before I could even process why they were standing there, a piece of paper was aggressively shoved through the brass mail slot at the bottom of my door. It fluttered onto the entryway rug, damp from the rain. I picked it up. The bold, arrogant letters at the top of the page made my stomach turn. It read, Elderly Residency Agreement and Cohabitation Contract. It was a legally binding document, drawn up by some cheap lawyer, essentially granting my parents permanent, irrevocable residency in my home. They wanted me to sign away my rights to my own property before I even opened the door. I unlocked the deadbolt and swung the heavy door open. The howling wind immediately swept into the foyer, bringing the smell of rain and wet asphalt. Warren and Valerie did not look like the proud, image-obsessed people who spent their entire lives judging my every move. They looked desperate. But true to form, my father did not ask for help. He demanded it. "Simone, step aside and help your mother with these bags," Warren ordered, his voice booming over the sound of the thunder. Darius is restructuring his startup company. We had to sell our house to help him cover some temporary business expenses. You have plenty of room for us here. Tasha and the kids are moving into your guest wing tomorrow morning. We are going to make this work as a family. I stared at them, absorbing the sheer, unadulterated audacity of his words. Darius was my older, the golden child of the family, who had spent his entire adult life bouncing from one fake business venture to another. Tasha was his materialistic, enabling wife who loved spending money she did not earn. My parents had just liquidated their entire life savings, lost their own home to fund my brother's delusions, and now they were standing on my porch expecting me to house the entire circus. I am not signing this piece of paper, I said, my voice dangerously calm. And nobody is moving into my guest wing. Not you, not Valerie, and definitely not Darius and Tasha. You made your choices, and you are going to have to live with them. Valerie stepped forward, her face twisting into a mask of pure indignation. How dare you speak to your father that way, she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at my face. We are your parents. We raised you. We sacrificed for you. It is your duty as a daughter to take care of us when we need it. You are going to sign that paper, and you are going to let us inside right now. I held my ground, standing firmly in the doorway. You sacrificed for Darius, I corrected her. You threw away your retirement for Darius. You do not get to come here and demand the fruits of my labor because your golden child bled you dry. Good night. I went to close the door, but Warren lunged forward. He slammed his hand against the heavy oak wood, stopping the door from shutting. His eyes were wide with a furious, entitled rage I had seen too many times during my childhood. But I was no longer a child he could intimidate. He stepped over the threshold, entering my home uninvited, and shoved me hard in the chest with both hands. The physical impact forced me a step backward into my own foyer. "You selfish little girl," Warren roared, spit flying from his lips. "You owe this family. You are going to do your duty." He expected me to cry. He expected me to cower. Instead, a surge of pure adrenaline flooded my veins. I did not flinch. I planted my feet firmly on the hardwood floor, raised my hands, and shoved him right back with every ounce of strength I had. Warren stumbled backward, losing his footing on the slick, wet porch. He crashed into Valerie, sending them both tumbling into their stack of expensive luggage in the pouring rain. "Not tonight," I said, my voice cutting through the storm like ice. "And not ever." I grabbed the heavy door and slammed it shut, throwing the deadbolt into place with a loud, satisfying click. Outside, I could hear Valerie screaming at the top of her lungs, her voice muffled by the thick wood and the raging storm. "She is assaulting us," Valerie shrieked to anyone who would listen. "I am calling 911. I am telling them my unhinged daughter is committing elder abuse." I stood in my quiet, warm foyer, perfectly composed. I did not panic. I did not beg them to stop. I simply picked up my phone, opened my security app, and hit the save button on the 4K video recording that had just captured my father committing criminal assault. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers cut through the dark, stormy night, illuminating the rain-soaked trees around my property. I watched through the front window as two officers stepped out of their vehicles, pulling their rain jackets tight against the biting wind. Warren and Valerie were waiting for them on the porch, looking completely pathetic. Valerie had fully committed to her role as the victim. She was shivering dramatically, clutching her arms around herself and sobbing uncontrollably as the officers approached. I opened the door before the officers even had a chance to knock. The older officer, a tall man with a stern expression, looked from my crying mother to me. "Ma'am, we received a 911 call reporting a domestic disturbance and elder abuse at this residence," the officer said, his voice projecting over the sound of the rain. "Can you step back and tell us what is going on here?" Before I could say a single word, Valerie launched into her performance. "Officer, thank God you are here," she cried, wiping fake tears from her face. "Our daughter has completely lost her mind. We came here seeking shelter from the storm because we are going through a difficult transition, and she physically attacked my husband. She shoved him into the rain. She is trying to steal this house from us. We helped finance this property, and now she is trying to throw us out on the street to die." Warren nodded vigorously, playing the part of the stoic, wounded patriarch. "We just want to get inside our home, officer. She is having some sort of mental breakdown. She has always been incredibly jealous of her older brother, and she is taking it out on us." The younger officer turned to me, his hand resting casually near his duty belt. "Ma'am, is this true? Did you physically altercate with these people? Are they on the deed to this house?" I smiled calmly, keeping my posture relaxed and non-threatening. I held up my iPad, which I had retrieved while waiting for them to arrive. "Officers, my name is Simone. I am a corporate financial consultant. I am the sole owner of this $1.5 million property. I purchased it entirely with my own funds. These people are my parents, but they do not have a single dime invested in this house. They are currently homeless because they liquidated their assets to fund my brother's fraudulent business ventures." Valerie shrieked, pointing at me again. "She is a liar. She stole her college fund from us, and now she is stealing our home. She owes us this house. She is a selfish, greedy child." I turned my head slightly, locking eyes with Valerie. "I won a full academic scholarship, Valerie. I worked 3 jobs during college while you and Warren drained my meager savings account to buy Darius his first Mercedes-Benz. You did not help me buy this house. You did not even know the address until you showed up tonight demanding I sign a fraudulent residency agreement." I handed the soggy elderly residency agreement to the older officer. "They tried to force me to sign this before I even opened the door. When I refused and told them they could not move in, my father decided to use physical force to enter my home." Warren puffed out his chest, stepping toward the officer. "That is an absolute lie. I never touched her. She shoved me off the porch like a maniac. You need to arrest her right now." I tapped the screen of my iPad and turned it around so both officers could see it clearly. "Actually, I have a 4K resolution security camera mounted right above your head, Warren. Let us watch the playback, shall we?" I hit play. The high-definition video was crystal clear despite the rain. It showed Warren and Valerie standing on the porch. It recorded crystal clear audio of Warren demanding that Darius and Tasha move into the guest wing. And then it showed the undeniable moment when Warren lunged forward, placed both hands firmly on my chest, and shoved me backward into my own foyer, crossing the threshold of my home uninvited. The video ended with me defending myself, pushing him back outside and securing my property. The heavy silence that fell over the porch was more deafening than the thunder. The older officer let out a slow, deep sigh and handed the iPad back to me. He turned to Warren and his stern expression had shifted from investigative to highly agitated. "Sir," the officer said, his voice dropping an octave. "What I just watched was you committing criminal assault and trespassing. You crossed the threshold of her home and put your hands on her first. She had every legal right to defend herself and remove you from the premises." Warren's jaw dropped. He looked like a fish gasping for air. "Now hold on a minute, officer. You do not understand family dynamics. I am her father. I have the right to discipline my child when she is being disrespectful. She is a 32-year-old woman, and this is her private property," the younger officer snapped, stepping closer to Warren. "You have no rights here. In fact, if the homeowner wishes to press charges right now, you will be leaving this property in the back of my cruiser in handcuffs." Valerie suddenly stopped crying. Her fake tears vanished instantly, replaced by sheer absolute panic. She grabbed Warren's arm, pulling him back slightly. "Officer, please, there has just been a misunderstanding. We are leaving. We will leave right now." I looked at the officers. "I am not pressing charges tonight," I said smoothly. "But I do want them formally trespassed from this property. If they ever show up here again, I want them arrested on sight." The older officer nodded. "You got it, ma'am." He turned back to my parents, pointing a stern finger down the long, winding driveway. "You heard the lady. You are officially trespassed. Grab your bags and get off this property immediately. If you so much as stop at the end of the driveway, I am taking you both to the county jail." Watching Warren and Valerie realize they had completely lost control was the most satisfying moment of my life. The entitlement that had fueled their entire existence was shattered by the cold, hard reality of the law. They had no power here. They had no leverage. They were just two people who had gambled their entire future on a golden child who bled them dry. Without a word, my father bent down and grabbed the handles of two heavy suitcases. My mother took two more. They had to drag their designer luggage through the mud and puddles, the wheels getting stuck in the gravel as the torrential rain soaked through their expensive clothes. They looked pathetic, stripped of all the dignity they prized above everything else. The officers stood on the porch with me, shining their heavy-duty flashlights down the driveway to ensure my parents kept moving. It took them 10 minutes to drag all 6 bags to their beat-up sedan parked near the gate. I watched the taillights flicker on and slowly fade into the darkness of the storm. The officers took my statement, provided me with a case number for the trespassing order, and wished me a safe night before heading back out into the rain. I closed the door, locked the deadbolt, and leaned against the wood. The house was quiet again. The warmth of the foyer wrapped around me, and for a moment I just breathed in the scent of cedar and rain. I had protected my sanctuary. I had finally drawn a line in the sand that they could not cross. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of expensive red wine. I took a sip, letting the rich flavor settle my nerves. Just as I set the glass down on the marble counter, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a text message illuminating the screen. It was from my sister-in-law, Tasha. I stared at the preview banner, knowing exactly what kind of venom she was about to spew. Tasha was the ultimate enabler, a woman who lived for designer labels and luxury cars, entirely funded by whatever scam Darius was running at the time. She despised me because I saw right through her, and because I refused to fund her lifestyle when Darius inevitably ran out of money. I unlocked the phone and opened the message. "You just put your own parents on the street in a storm, you heartless witch. Darius had to put them up in a cheap motel because our accounts are frozen. Watch your back at the office tomorrow. Darius and I are coming to collect what you owe this family. You messed with the wrong people. We are not leaving until you pay up." I read the message twice. They were coming to my office. They were planning to ambush me at my consulting firm in downtown Atlanta, a place where reputation and professionalism were everything. They thought they could intimidate me in front of my high net worth clients and force me into submission. They thought they could embarrass me into handing over my hard-earned money to save their crumbling facade. I took another sip of wine and smiled. They had absolutely no idea what they were walking into. I set the phone down on the counter and walked to my home office. I booted up my secure laptop and logged into my private investigation files. I had been tracking Darius's financial movements for months entirely out of curiosity, just waiting for the day his house of cards would collapse. "Let them come," I whispered to the empty room. "Let them come to my office and try to demand my money. Because tomorrow I am going to show Tasha exactly where her husband's money has really been going. And it is going to tear their entire world apart." I arrived at my Buckhead consulting firm at 7 sharp. My executive office was a reflection of everything my family insisted I could never achieve. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Atlanta skyline. Custom mahogany shelves lined the walls, and the minimalist decor projected absolute control. By 9 o'clock, I was seated at my polished desk, wrapping up a portfolio review with Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, two of my highest net worth clients. They trusted me with millions because I never let emotion cloud my judgment. That composure was about to be tested. The heavy glass doors to my executive suite burst inward, hitting the wall with a deafening crack that made Mrs. Sterling flinch. My receptionist Chloe was trailing frantically behind the intruders, her face flushed with sheer panic as she tried to block their path. She knew how important this meeting was, but she was no match for a grown man running on pure adrenaline and rage. "Simone, I am so sorry," Chloe gasped, gripping the door handle. "I told them you were in a private meeting, but they pushed right past my desk." I raised a hand signaling Chloe to stop. I did not need to ask who the intruders were. Darius strode into my office looking like a man who had not slept in days. His designer suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, and the arrogant swagger he usually carried himself with had been replaced by manic, desperate energy. Right behind him was his wife, Tasha. She was clutching a counterfeit luxury handbag like a shield, her face twisted in a sneer. They did not care that I was sitting with clients or about my professional reputation. Darius marched directly to my desk, his eyes wild. He swept his arm across the polished wood surface, knocking over a stack of leather-bound financial brochures. They scattered across the floor, sliding to Mr. Sterling's expensive Italian loafers. "You thought you could just block my numbers and ignore this family," Darius shouted, his voice cracking with rage. "You thought you could throw mom and dad out into the rain like stray dogs while you sit up here in your glass tower." I did not raise my voice or break eye contact. I turned to my clients with a tight, apologetic smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, I am incredibly sorry for the interruption. If you could please step out to the executive lounge, my assistant will bring you some fresh coffee. We can conclude our review later." The older couple exchanged a horrified glance, quickly gathering their coats and hurrying out of the room. Chloe pulled the heavy glass doors shut behind them, leaving me alone with the two people who made it their mission to bleed my parents dry. Now that the audience was gone, Tasha stepped forward. She slammed both of her hands down on my desk, leaning in close enough that I could smell her overly sweet perfume. "We are not playing games with you today, Simone," Tasha hissed. "They repossessed Darius's Range Rover at 6 o'clock this morning. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was to watch repo men hitch up our vehicle while neighbors watched? I had to take a cheap taxi here because my husband's accounts are frozen. You have a brand new Porsche Panamera sitting in the VIP garage. You are going to hand over the keys right now. We need a vehicle to maintain our image, and you owe this family for what you did last night." I looked at her, my expression entirely blank. "You want the keys to my car because your husband failed to make his auto payments. Is that the logic we are operating with today?" "It is not about the car," Darius yelled, pacing across the Persian rug. "I need capital, Simone. I need liquidity right now. My startup got hit by a crypto crash. The market tanked, and the liquidity pools froze due to a sudden algorithmic decoupling. It is a temporary setback. The software developers are patching the smart contracts as we speak, but I need bridge capital to keep the servers running and satisfy the initial seed investors. The $740,000 mom and dad gave me got locked in a decentralized exchange." He stopped pacing and slammed his fist on my desk. You have a house worth $1.5 million sitting on Lake Oconee with zero mortgage. I checked the public county records. You are going to call your banker right now and pull a $740,000 line of credit against that property. You are going to wire those funds to my business account before noon. Once the market rebounds, I will pay you back with interest. If you do not do this, Mom and Dad are going to be permanently homeless and it will be your fault. I stared at him. The sheer entitlement radiating from him was almost impressive. He had drained every single penny our parents had ever saved. He had let them lose their home. And now, facing the severe consequences of his own disastrous choices, he was trying to leverage my hard work to dig himself out of a deep grave he dug with his own two hands. For a brief second, I looked at the two people standing before me. My brother, who had always been praised by our parents for his supposed genius, was nothing more than a desperate con artist, wearing a bespoke suit he could no longer afford to dry clean. His wife, who had spent years looking down her nose at my sensible lifestyle, was now demanding my car because she felt completely entitled to the rewards of my discipline. The irony was beautiful in its execution. They had built their entire identities on a fragile foundation of lies and other people's money. Now they were furious that I adamantly refused to become the structural support keeping that rotting foundation from collapsing. Any other professional in my building would have hit the panic button under their desk. They would have called building security and had these two lunatics dragged out in handcuffs. But I did not reach for the phone. I did not call security. I just leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, folded my hands in my lap, and let a slow, terrifying smile spread across my face. "You think this is funny?" Tasha screamed, her voice reaching a shrill, hysterical pitch. "Your parents are sleeping in a cheap motel off the highway because of you, and you are sitting here smiling. Give us the keys to your car, Simone. Do not make me come back there and take them from you." I let out a soft laugh. "You are welcome to try, Tasha. But before you do something that will land you in a jail cell, I highly recommend you both sit down and listen very carefully to what I am about to say." Darius glared at me, his chest heaving. "I am not sitting down until you initiate that wire transfer." I leaned forward, my tone dropping to a deadly whisper. "I track money for a living, Darius. I investigate corporate fraud, locate hidden assets, and dissect structured financial anomalies for multinational companies worth more than your entire existence. Do you honestly think I did not run a full forensic audit on your tech startup the second Mom and Dad told me they foolishly gave you their life savings? I know exactly how you operate, and I know exactly where the money went." Darius froze, the manic energy draining from his face in an instant. I kept my eyes locked on his. Decentralized exchanges, liquidity pools, a sudden crypto crash. It sounds like a fantastic pitch for parents who can barely operate a smartphone. It sounds like the perfect excuse to explain why $750,000 suddenly vanished. But you forgot one crucial detail, Big Brother. You forgot what I do for a living. I reached out and slowly opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Tasha watched my hand, her bravado faltering as uncertainty crept into her eyes. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. I placed it gently on the polished wood surface right between the two of them. "You did not lose a single dime in a crypto crash, Darius," I said, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. "You never invested that money. You never built a tech startup. You just created a shell company to funnel Mom and Dad's retirement funds into your own pockets." "That is a lie," Darius stammered, though his voice lacked the aggressive volume from just before. "You do not know what you are talking about. You do not understand decentralized finance." I slid the manila folder across the desk. "I understand offshore wire transfers perfectly," I replied, my smile fading into absolute ice. Darius stared at the thick envelope. His hand hovered in the air. The manic confidence that had propelled him through my glass doors evaporated. He knew what was in that folder. He knew the carefully constructed illusion he sold to our parents, his wife, and himself was about to shatter into a million irreparable pieces. Tasha snatched the folder from the polished mahogany surface before Darius could stop her. Her acrylic nails scraped against the paper as she flipped it open. I leaned back in my chair, steepled my fingers, and watched the devastating realization wash over her face. "What is this?" Tasha demanded, reading the first page. These are banking records. Why does it say Miami? Darius, what is Ocean Breeze Holdings Liability Company? Darius swallowed hard, stepping backward. Tasha, put that down. She is manipulating us. It is a fabricated document to avoid giving us money. I simply let the facts speak. Ocean Breeze Holdings is a shell corporation registered in southern Florida. I explained calmly. Created exactly 4 days after Warren and Valerie handed you their $740,000. You told them the money was locked in a liquidity pool, but as the wire transfer receipts show, every single cent was routed directly to Miami. Tasha flipped to the next page, her breath hitched. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over my office. She pulled out a stack of glossy, high-definition photographs that my private investigator had overnighted to me 3 weeks ago. The first photo showed a stunning, sleek, luxury yacht docked at an exclusive Miami marina. The second showed Darius standing on the deck of that yacht holding champagne. The third photo was the fatal blow. It showed Darius wrapping his arms around a beautiful 22-year-old fitness model wearing a designer bikini, laughing and holding up a set of keys. "Who is this?" Tasha whispered, her voice trembling with shock and rising fury. "Darius, who is this woman?" Darius tugged at his silk tie, suddenly unable to breathe. "Baby, it is a corporate asset," he stammered defensively. "The boat is an asset for the startup. We use it to entertain venture capitalists. That girl is just a brand ambassador. She is a promotional model we hired for a marketing campaign. You have to believe me." I let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "A brand ambassador. That is incredibly generous of you, Darius." Flip to the last document in the folder, Tasha. The one with the official Florida state seal. Tasha ripped the photos aside and stared at the final page. Her hands shook violently, crinkling the heavy paper. Her eyes widened, scanning the legal text. "The yacht is not a corporate asset," I said, delivering the final blow. "The vessel was purchased in full with cash using our parents' life savings. And it is not titled under your husband's name, nor is it titled under his fake startup. The yacht is legally titled under the name of Destiny Caldwell, the 22-year-old brand ambassador in the photo. He bought his mistress a yacht with the money that was supposed to save your parents." The counterfeit luxury handbag hit the floor with a dull thud. She stood perfectly still for 3 agonizing seconds. The reality of her situation hit her like a freight train. She was not the wealthy wife of a tech genius. She was the financially ruined spouse of a grifter who stole his family's money to fund a secret life with a younger woman. Her Range Rover was gone. Her bank accounts were frozen. And the man standing in front of her was the reason why. Darius made a fatal mistake. He reached out and grabbed Tasha's arm. "Tasha, baby, please let us just go outside and talk about this." She set us up. Tasha did not speak. She did not cry. She pivoted on her designer heels, pulled her arm back, and slapped Darius across the face. The sound was explosive. It echoed off the floor-to-ceiling windows and rang through the entire executive suite. The sheer force of the impact sent Darius stumbling sideways into my guest chair. A bright, angry red handprint instantly materialized across his cheek. He groaned, clutching his face in utter disbelief. "You worthless, lying piece of garbage!" Tasha screamed at the top of her lungs. Her voice was guttural, completely devoid of the refined persona she tried so desperately to maintain. "I defended you. I stood by you when your car got towed this morning. I came here to fight your sister for you, and you bought a yacht for some girl with your parents' money. You left us with nothing." "Tasha, keep your voice down!" Darius hissed, glancing frantically toward my glass doors. "People can hear you. We are in a professional building." "I do not care who hears me," she shrieked, lunging at him and hitting his chest. "You ruined my life. You told me we were going to be billionaires. You told me this was a temporary cash flow problem. You gave away our future to a child in Miami. I am going to destroy you." Darius grabbed her wrists, struggling to hold her back as she kicked and thrashed. "Get off me," she wailed. "I want a divorce. I am taking everything." "You have nothing to take," Darius yelled back, his own temper finally erupting. "You spent $50,000 on clothes last month while I was trying to keep the creditors away. You are just as broke as I am." Watching them tear each other apart in my office was karmic justice. They walked in united, ready to intimidate me, demanding my hard-earned wealth to maintain their illusions. It took exactly 4 pieces of paper to completely obliterate their marriage and false superiority. They were behaving like wild animals, screaming and wrestling over the shredded remains of their dignity. I watched the chaos unfold for another 30 seconds, entirely unbothered. I straightened the collar of my blazer, reached over to my desk console, and pressed the silver intercom button. "Yes, Ms. Simone," my receptionist Chloe answered immediately. "Chloe, please send Kevin and the lobby security team up to my office right away," I instructed calmly. "We have 2 trespassers who need to be escorted out of the building. And Chloe, tell them to bring the freight elevator keys. I do not want them disrupting the main lobby traffic." "Understood right away," she replied. Darius and Tasha were so consumed by their argument, they did not notice the glass doors open. 3 security guards stepped into the suite. Kevin assessed the situation instantly. He did not ask questions. He stepped forward, grabbed Darius by the back of his jacket, and hauled him away from Tasha. "Hey, let go of me," Darius yelled, struggling. "I am her brother. I have a right to be here. You cannot touch me." "You lost the right to be here the second you threw a tantrum in my place of business," I said. "Get them out of my sight, Kevin." The second guard gently but firmly secured Tasha by her arm. She did not fight the guard. She was weeping hysterically, her makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. She pointed a trembling finger at Darius as they dragged him toward the exit. "I am calling my lawyer," Tasha screamed. "You are going to rot in a federal prison, Darius. I will make sure of it." Darius fought against the guards down the hallway, shouting obscenities, blaming the crypto market, blaming Tasha, blaming me for exposing him. His pathetic excuses faded as the heavy glass doors swung shut, sealing my office in uninterrupted silence. I stood alone in my executive suite. The only evidence that they had ever been there was the overturned stack of financial brochures, a counterfeit handbag abandoned on the floor, and the manila folder sitting open on my desk, displaying the photo of a luxury yacht. I picked up the cheap handbag and tossed it in the trash. I gathered the brochures, stacked them neatly, and closed the manila folder, locking it securely back inside my desk. I took a cleansing breath, feeling the tension evaporate. The ambush had failed spectacularly. My boundaries remained intact. I walked over to the windows and looked out over the Atlanta skyline. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp morning. The sunlight reflected off the glass towers. I had fought tooth and nail to build my place in this city. I endured years of being called the selfish daughter because I refused to play a supporting role in my brother's theatrical production of a life. Today, the curtain had finally fallen on his performance. I returned to my desk, smoothing my skirt as I sat back down in my leather chair. I tapped my computer mouse to wake the monitors, ready to resume my day, and apologize properly to the Sterlings for the unprecedented interruption. As the screen illuminated, a notification popped up in the corner of my primary monitor. It was an incoming email to my personal account. The sender's name made my eyes narrow. It was Warren. My father had been silent since the police escorted him off my property. I assumed he was busy dealing with the reality of his homelessness and the collapse of his favorite son's empire. But Warren never retreated gracefully. He believed his authority was absolute, and any defiance had to be punished publicly. I clicked on the notification and opened the email. It consisted of exactly 3 sentences typed with the bitter, venomous entitlement that had defined my entire childhood. "You think you are smart, destroying your brother's marriage and disrespecting your parents in our time of need. You think your money makes you untouchable. See you at church on Sunday for Aunt Mabel's memorial service. The whole congregation will know who you really are, and God will judge your wicked heart." I read the words slowly, letting the threat sink in. Warren could not beat me legally, and he could not overpower me financially, so he was resorting to the only weapon he had left: respectability politics. He was going to use the sacred ground of our church, a pillar of the Atlanta community, to launch a public smear campaign against me. He intended to stand in front of the pastor and our extended family and paint me as a monster who threw her destitute parents into the street. He wanted to publicly humiliate me and force me into submission through communal shame. He wanted to break me in front of the people who had known me since I was a little girl. I stared at the screen and a calculating resolve settled over my mind. Warren wanted a public spectacle. He wanted to drag our family business into the light of day. He wanted the congregation to know who I was. I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the name I needed. I tapped the screen and brought the phone to my ear, listening to it ring. He wanted the truth revealed at the altar. I would gladly oblige him, but I was not going to that church alone. Sunday morning in Atlanta arrived with a thick and suffocating humidity that mirrored the heavy tension settling over my life. Greater Hope Fellowship was not just a regular church. It was a historic institution in our community, a highly revered place where social standing, family legacy, and respectability politics reigned supreme. The sanctuary was an expansive, beautiful masterpiece of stained glass and polished oak filled to the brim with the city's most influential African American families. For my parents, this church was their ultimate stage. They had spent decades meticulously curating a flawless image of devout, prosperous, and generous community pillars. Today, they fully planned to use that carefully crafted reputation to completely destroy mine. I walked through the heavy wooden front doors wearing a tailored black designer dress, my posture perfectly straight and my head held high. The atmosphere shifted the absolute second I crossed the threshold into the building. The usual warm greetings, polite nods, and friendly smiles were entirely absent. Instead, a chilling, deeply uncomfortable silence rippled through the crowded vestibule. I felt the aggressive weight of hundreds of eyes snapping directly toward me. The communal judgment was palpable, hanging in the air like dark storm clouds. At the very front of the sanctuary, seated in the prime center pew, reserved specifically for grieving families and VIP members, were Warren and Valerie. They had obviously arrived early and had already laid the extensive groundwork for their vicious smear campaign. Valerie was wearing an overly dramatic somber black hat, with a lace veil dabbing her dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, while entirely surrounded by a cluster of highly sympathetic deacons. Warren was standing near the grand altar, shaking his head with a manufactured look of profound sorrow as he whispered toxic, venomous lies directly into the ear of Pastor Evans. They were perfectly playing the role of the devoted, heartbroken parents who had just been brutally victimized by their own flesh and blood. I could hear the aggressive, hushed whispers erupting from the crowded pews as I slowly walked down the center carpeted aisle. "I cannot believe she actually showed her face here today," an older woman whispered loudly to her neighbor. "I heard she threw her own elderly parents out into the freezing rain." A man muttered, shaking his head in absolute disgust. "After everything Warren and Valerie sacrificed for her, she leaves them entirely homeless and destitute," another voice chimed in from the back row. I completely ignored the venomous commentary surrounding me. I found an empty seat a few rows behind my parents, crossed my legs elegantly, and waited in absolute silence. I knew exactly how Warren operated. He was a deeply insecure man who thrived on public spectacle, genuinely believing that communal pressure could force absolutely anyone into submission. He thought the sheer crushing embarrassment of being publicly shunned by our entire extended family and our beloved church community would completely break my spirit. He thought I would eventually bow my head hand over my valuable assets and beg for his fake forgiveness just to save face in front of the congregation. I was severely and entirely mistaken. The weekly memorial service for Aunt Mabel proceeded with beautiful soaring choir hymns and heartfelt emotional scriptures. But the solemnity of the religious occasion was merely a convenient waiting game for my father. As the long service finally neared its scheduled conclusion, Pastor Evans stepped up to the wooden pulpit and warmly invited immediate family members to share a few brief words of remembrance. Warren immediately stood up from the front pew. He smoothed the lapels of his expensive suit jacket, walked up the carpeted stairs to the grand altar, and took the heavy silver microphone. He started his performance with a brief, incredibly superficial tribute to Aunt Mabel, speaking vaguely about her lifelong dedication to traditional family values. Then his tone shifted drastically. His voice cracked with highly theatrical fake grief, and he looked out over the massive congregation, letting his cold eyes settle directly on me. Aunt Mabel truly believed that family was the absolute foundation of everything, Warren proclaimed, his deep voice echoing loudly through the vaulted ceiling of the sanctuary. She believed that we must constantly protect each other unconditionally, support each other, and always honor the heavy sacrifices our elders made for our success. Unfortunately, we live in a dark, troubling time where extreme financial greed has completely poisoned the hearts of our youth. We live in a world where a selfish child can take the very life savings of her struggling parents, manipulate them into signing away their entire retirement, and cruelly cast them out into the cold street without a single second thought. A collective, highly audible gasp swept violently through the packed sanctuary. Hundreds of heads instantly turned to glare fiercely at me. Valerie let out a loud, tragic sob from the front pew, dramatically burying her face in her hands and leaning heavily on a nearby deacon for support. The church elders shook their heads in absolute, unapologetic disgust. My wife and I are currently without a home. Warren continued, tightly gripping the wooden edges of the pulpit to emphasize his fake, agonizing anguish. We gave absolutely everything we had to unconditionally support our children. We gladly sacrificed our daily comfort so they could achieve great corporate success. And in return for our boundless love, our daughter Simone used her corporate financial expertise to maliciously trick us. She seized all our assets, locked us out of a house during a massive thunderstorm, and left us with absolutely nothing to our names. The hostility filling the large room was completely suffocating. Extended family members who had known me since I was a crawling toddler were looking at me as if I were a literal monster. I sat perfectly still, my facial expression betraying absolutely zero emotion. I did not slouch in my seat. I did not look away in shame. I stared right back at Warren, silently letting him dig his own grave as deep as he possibly could. But Warren was not finished with his grand manipulative performance. He reached deeply into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a folded piece of thick white paper. He unfolded it deliberately, holding it high up in the air for the entire church to clearly see. I really did not want to bring ugly legal matters into the sacred house of the Lord, Warren declared, his voice rising with intense righteous indignation. But the Lord demands ultimate truth and strict accountability. 5 years ago, when our family business was facing a minor financial hardship, Simone signed this specific promissory note. She legally agreed to put her expensive lake house up as physical collateral to secure the future of our struggling family. She promised to protect us. But when the time finally came to honor her written word, she turned her back on us and greedily kept the property solely for herself. He pointed a shaking, dramatic finger directly at me. Simone, you are sitting right now in the house of God. You cannot possibly hide from his ultimate judgment, and you can no longer hide from the plain truth. You owe this entire family your home. You owe us the deep financial security we originally paid for. I am asking you right here at the holy altar to finally do the right thing. Hand over the keys to the property you legally pledged to us. Save your eternal soul and make this broken family whole again today. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of his lie was staggering. There was absolutely no promissory note in existence. I had never signed my valuable property over as collateral for anything, let alone to cover the reckless, fraudulent financial disasters repeatedly caused by my brother Darius. Warren was holding a completely fabricated, highly illegal document, aggressively attempting to use the heavy moral weight of the church to extort a $1.5 million commercial real estate asset from me in plain broad daylight. The congregation was completely captivated by his highly emotional performance. An older woman sitting 2 rows over actually muttered loudly, "Lord, please have mercy on that wicked, selfish girl." The immense communal pressure was intense, perfectly designed to make any normal person completely crack under the crushing weight of public humiliation. Pastor Evans stepped forward, looking deeply troubled by the escalating situation. He placed a comforting hand on Warren's shoulder, then looked down at me with profound disappointment. "Simone," the pastor said softly into the microphone, his voice echoing, "this is a sacred house of healing and family reconciliation. If what your heartbroken father says is true, I pray you find it deep in your heart to honor your family commitments and restore your parents. We simply cannot move forward with such deep resentment in our hearts. I slowly stood up from the hard wooden pew. The entire sanctuary went completely terrifyingly silent. Everyone in the building was eagerly waiting for me to break down in tears, loudly apologize, and immediately surrender my hard-earned wealth to save my completely ruined reputation. I smoothly brushed the skirt of my black dress, stepped gracefully into the center aisle, and looked straight up at my father standing on the pulpit. "I do not owe you a single dime, Warren," I said, my confident voice carrying clearly through the massive room without the need for any microphone. "And I certainly do not owe you my home. That piece of paper you are holding up is a complete and utter fabrication. It is a desperate, pathetic forgery created by a man who burned his own life to the ground and is now desperately trying to steal mine." Valerie jumped up frantically from the front pew, her face twisted with unhinged rage. "How dare you lie in the sanctuary?" she screamed, pointing an angry finger at me. "You signed that paper. We have the solid proof right here. You are a wicked, utterly selfish child." Warren held the fake paper even higher. "The signature is right here. It matches perfectly. You cannot simply lie your way out of a binding legal contract, Simone. Hand over the keys right now, or we will take absolutely everything you have in a court of law." The massive congregation began to murmur incredibly loudly. The intense tension in the air was electric, a highly volatile powder keg, just waiting for a single tiny spark to ignite. Warren firmly thought he had me completely and utterly trapped. He thought I was standing entirely alone against an angry, judgmental mob of our peers. But I was not alone. I smiled, a slow, highly confident expression that made the triumphant, arrogant smirk on Warren's face falter slightly. "I did not come here today to debate blatant lies with a desperate con artist," I replied evenly, my voice projecting unwavering authority. "I came here today to let the absolute truth speak entirely for itself." Right on cue, the heavy, solid oak doors at the very back of the sanctuary swung open with a resounding, massive crash that echoed like a loud gunshot through the high vaulted ceilings. Every single head in the building whipped around instantly to look at the entrance. The bright sunlight from the busy street poured into the dark vestibule, perfectly illuminating the commanding silhouette of a woman standing firmly in the open doorway. It was Auntie Viv. My mother's older sister was an absolute legend in the Atlanta legal community. She was a fierce, sharp-suited, high-powered corporate attorney who took absolutely no prisoners in or out of the courtroom. She deeply despised respectability politics, hated family nonsense, and had zero tolerance for Warren's lifelong history of manipulation. She was the only person in our entire extended family who saw right through my parents' highly toxic facade, and she had always been my absolute greatest ally. Auntie Viv marched straight down the center aisle of the church. She was wearing a perfectly tailored crimson power suit, her expensive heels clicking sharply and loudly against the polished hardwood floor with terrifying, undeniable authority. In her right hand, she gripped a thick black leather briefcase. Her sharp eyes were locked directly on Warren, burning with a furious, righteous intensity that made several prominent deacons physically step back as she confidently passed their pews. "Not today!" Warren Auntie Viv shouted loudly, her powerful, unwavering voice booming through the silent sanctuary and instantly silencing every single whisper in the massive room. "Not today, and certainly not in this house." She reached the very front of the church, brushing right past a stunned Valerie, who looked as if she had just seen a terrifying ghost. Auntie Viv marched straight up the carpeted stairs to the holy altar, stopping mere inches away from my trembling father. Warren swallowed incredibly hard, nervously clutching the fake promissory note tightly to his chest. "Vivian, this matter does not concern you," he stammered weakly, stepping backward toward the pastor. "This is a strictly private matter between me and my daughter." Auntie Viv let out a sharp, entirely humorless laugh that echoed loudly through the pastor's microphone. "Private matter. You just dragged this innocent girl's good name through the absolute mud in front of 300 people, Warren. You brought this toxic mess to the pulpit, so we are going to finish it right here at the pulpit today." She aggressively slammed her heavy black leather briefcase down onto the wooden altar right next to the sacred communion table. The loud, sudden thud made Valerie jump violently in the front pew. Auntie Viv forcefully snapped the brass locks open and reached inside the case. "You want to stand up here and talk about truth and accountability?" Auntie Viv said, her sharp voice dripping with absolute venom. Then let us talk about the real factual reason you and my sister are currently homeless. Let us tell this entire congregation exactly what you did to end up standing on Simone's front porch in the freezing rain, pathetically begging for a place to stay. Auntie Viv pulled a massive thick stack of official bank-stamped financial documents from her briefcase and turned around to fully face the completely shocked, silent congregation. Auntie Viv pulled a massive thick stack of official bank-stamped financial documents from her briefcase and turned around to fully face the completely shocked, silent congregation. Warren stood frozen at the pulpit. His hand holding the fake promissory note trembled as Auntie Viv reached out and snatched the piece of paper right out of his grip. She held it up to the light streaming through the stained glass windows and let out a sharp laugh. "You want to present legal documents in the house of the Lord." Auntie Viv projected her voice across the sanctuary. "Then we are going to look at real legal documents. This piece of paper Warren just paraded in front of you is nothing but a cheap amateur forgery." Valerie gasped from the front pew. "That is a lie. Simone signed that paper 5 years ago." Auntie Viv ignored her sister completely. She pulled a thick bound report from her briefcase and slammed it onto the pulpit next to the microphone. "I hired an independent forensic handwriting expert. This certified report confirms beyond a shadow of a doubt that Simone never signed this document. The pen pressure, the stroke angles, and the digital trace all point to just one person: your golden child, Darius." The congregation erupted into loud whispers. Deacons, who had been comforting Valerie just moments before, physically took a step away from her. Warren tried to grab the microphone back, but Auntie Viv blocked him with her shoulder. "You are committing fraud right here at the altar, Warren," Auntie Viv said, staring him down. "If you ever try to file this fake piece of paper in a real court of law, I will personally ensure that both you and your son are prosecuted for forgery. But that is not even the worst thing you have done to this young woman." Auntie Viv turned back to the crowd. She held up the thick stack of bank-stamped papers. "Warren and Valerie just stood up here and cried about losing their entire life savings. They told you they sacrificed their hard-earned retirement funds to help their son, and now they are homeless. That is the biggest lie told in this building today." Warren's face drained of all color. He looked absolutely terrified. "Vivian, do not do this. This is family business. You made it public business when you tried to destroy my niece in front of her community," Auntie Viv shot back. She turned the microphone toward herself. Warren and Valerie did not lose their retirement savings. They never had $740,000 in retirement savings. They got that money by taking out a massive reverse mortgage on the ancestral family home. "My mother, your grandmother, left that house in an irrevocable trust." Auntie Viv continued, her voice trembling with genuine anger. She explicitly stated in her will that the house was to be divided equally between her two grandchildren, Darius and Simone. It was supposed to be their foundation. But Warren and Valerie found a loophole. They used their status as the executors of the estate to bypass the trust entirely. They secretly mortgaged the house to the absolute maximum limit, bleeding every single cent of equity out of the property my dear mother worked her entire long life to buy. "And what did they do with that stolen inheritance?" Auntie Viv asked the crowd. "Did they invest it? Did they secure the family future?" No. They handed all $740,000 directly to Darius. And Darius used that stolen money to buy a luxury yacht in Miami for his 22-year-old mistress. The reaction from the church was instantaneous and explosive. People gasped loudly. The respectful atmosphere of the sanctuary dissolved into complete chaos. The community that Warren and Valerie had tried to weaponize against me was now turning on them with full force. Valerie jumped up from the pew. She was shaking violently, her elaborate black hat sitting askew on her head. She pointed a frantic finger at Auntie Viv. "You are lying. You are just jealous. You have always been jealous of us." Auntie Viv did not even blink. She held up the bank statements. "The truth is right here in black and white, Valerie. You stole from your own daughter. You let the bank take our mother's home. You threw away our family legacy so your son could pretend to be a tech mogul. And when the money ran out and the bank came to evict you, you tried to steal Simone's house to cover up your crimes." Pastor Evans stepped forward. He looked physically sick. He looked at the bank statements in Auntie Viv's hand, then looked at Warren. The disappointment in the pastor's eyes was absolute. Warren the pastor said, his voice echoing softly through the microphone. "Is this true? Did you mortgage your mother's house and steal your daughter's inheritance?" I stepped out of my pew and walked slowly down the center aisle toward the altar. The crowd parted for me, their previous hostility replaced by profound pity and deep respect. I stopped at the bottom of the carpeted stairs and looked up at my parents. "You came here today to shame me," I said, my voice carrying clearly. "You thought you could use this church to bully me into giving up everything I have worked for. But you forgot that I am the one who knows how to read the financial records." I looked at my mother. "You always called me the selfish daughter. But the only selfish people in this room are the two of you. You destroyed our grandmother's legacy. You let Darius ruin your lives, and you will never ever take mine." Warren finally found his voice. It was a weak, pathetic sound. "Simone, please. We are your parents. We had to try to save your brother. He was in trouble." "You did not save him," I replied coldly. "You enabled him. And now you have to pay the price." Auntie Viv packed the documents back into her black leather briefcase and snapped the brass locks shut. She walked down the stairs and stood right beside me, presenting a united, unbreakable front. The message was clear. I was not alone, and I was not going to be intimidated. Pastor Evans gently took the microphone from the pulpit. He looked at my parents with a stern, unforgiving expression. "Warren, Valerie, I think it is best if you leave this sanctuary right now. This is a place of worship and truth. You have brought deceit and theft to the altar. We will pray for your souls, but you are no longer welcome to stand before this congregation today." Warren slowly walked down the stairs, his head hanging low in absolute disgrace. Valerie, however, was entirely incapable of accepting defeat gracefully. Her sorrow vanished, replaced by a venomous, unhinged fury. She grabbed her expensive purse and marched down the aisle behind Warren. As she passed me, she stopped. Her face was twisted with pure hatred, her eyes burning with a desperate, toxic rage. She did not care that the entire church was watching her. She did not care that her reputation was completely destroyed. "You think you have won!" Valerie screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing violently off the stained glass windows. "You think you can just humiliate us and walk away with everything. We are your parents. We gave you life. You owe us. We will take everything you have legally." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked her directly in the eyes and offered her a calm, chilling smile. "You can certainly try, Valerie," I replied smoothly. "But you are going to need a very good lawyer. And unfortunately for you, you are completely out of money." Valerie let out a sound of pure frustration, turned on her heel, and stormed out of the heavy oak doors, following Warren into the sweltering Atlanta heat. The heavy sanctuary doors swung shut behind them, sealing their permanent exile from the community they loved more than their own daughter. The church remained completely silent for a long moment. Then Pastor Evans cleared his throat and asked the congregation to bow their heads in a prayer for healing and truth. I stood beside Auntie Viv, feeling a profound sense of closure. The burden of their lies was lifted. But I knew Warren and Valerie well enough to know this was not the end. They had promised to take everything I had legally. They were going to launch a full-scale war against my assets, my career, and my life. As Auntie Viv and I walked out of the church together, stepping into the bright sunlight, my phone vibrated in my purse. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was a notification from my corporate legal team. The battle for my reputation was over. But the war for my empire began. The notification from my corporate legal team was just the opening salvo. 2 days after the church memorial. I was sitting in my downtown office when a process server bypassed the front desk and dropped a massive stack of legal documents directly onto my desk. I stared at the thick manila envelope, recognizing the name of the law firm printed on the return label. Warren and Valerie had managed to find one of the most notoriously aggressive, borderline unethical attorneys in Atlanta. They were officially suing me. I called Auntie Viv immediately. She arrived 20 minutes later, marching into my office with a steaming cup of black coffee and a terrifyingly calm demeanor. We spread the documents across my conference table. The lawsuit was built on a legal doctrine known as equitable trust. Warren and Valerie were claiming that because they had paid for my childhood medical bills, provided basic shelter during my adolescence, and paid a handful of college application fees 15 years ago, they were legally entitled to a percentage of my current net worth. They were demanding 50% equity in my corporate consulting firm and the immediate transfer of the Lake Oconee property to their names. It was a completely delusional, legally frivolous argument. But the strategy was obvious. They did not actually expect to win in a legitimate courtroom. They wanted to tie my assets up in protracted, incredibly expensive litigation. They hoped the mounting legal fees and the sheer exhaustion of fighting my own parents would eventually force me to settle out of court and hand them a massive cash payout. They were trying to bleed me dry through attrition. Auntie Viv tossed the paperwork back onto the table with a scoff. They found a bottom-feeding lawyer willing to work on contingency, she explained, tapping her pen against the wood surface. They have absolutely zero money to pay hourly legal fees, so this attorney is banking on you settling quickly to avoid bad press. We are not settling. We are going to file a motion to dismiss with prejudice, and I will personally file for sanctions against this law firm for bringing a frivolous suit. I nodded, feeling a cold resolve settle over me. I was not going to give them a single cent. But Warren and Valerie were not operating alone. While they launched their bogus legal war, Darius was preparing an entirely different kind of attack. Darius was desperate. His fake crypto startup was completely bankrupt. His luxury cars were repossessed, and Tasha was holding her bags at the door, threatening to file for divorce if he did not produce a massive amount of cash immediately. He needed to prove to his materialistic wife that he could still dominate me and extract the wealth they felt entitled to. Since he could not win financially, he decided to destroy my professional reputation. The attack began on a Tuesday morning. My assistant Chloe rushed into my office, her face pale, holding her tablet. "Simone, you need to look at our online business profiles right now," she urged, her voice trembling slightly. "We are being flooded." I pulled up our firm's primary directory listings and felt my stomach drop. Overnight, my highly respected consulting firm had been bombarded with hundreds of horrific one-star reviews. The comments were utterly vicious and entirely fabricated. They all repeated variations of the exact same lie. The reviewers claimed they were elderly clients who had been financially exploited by my firm. They posted detailed, entirely fake stories about how I had allegedly tricked vulnerable senior citizens into signing away their retirement funds and properties. Darius had taken the exact scenario of what he had done to our parents and brilliantly weaponized it against me. He used whatever remaining cash he had hidden away to hire an overseas bot farm. The fake profiles were relentless, churning out dozens of new, highly damaging reviews every single hour. He knew that in the world of high-level corporate consulting, reputation and absolute trust were the only currencies that truly mattered. If my clients thought I was engaging in predatory financial practices against the elderly, my firm would collapse overnight. I was trying to create a smokescreen to cover his own crimes while simultaneously blackmailing me into a settlement. Shortly after the reviews started pouring in, I received a taunting text message from Tasha. It read, "People are finally seeing the real you. Pay Darius what you owe him for the lake house, or the reviews keep coming." The real-world consequences of the cyber smear campaign were immediate and devastating. In the corporate finance sector, optics are everything. By Wednesday afternoon, my phone was ringing off the hook, with panicked inquiries from clients and stakeholders who had seen the sudden influx of horrific accusations. I spent hours on conference calls calmly explaining that we were the victims of a coordinated malicious cyber attack and that we were working with legal counsel to resolve the issue. But reassurance was not enough for everyone. At 3 o'clock, I received a devastating call from the executive board of my largest corporate client. We had been managing their commercial real estate acquisitions for 3 years, a contract that represented nearly 30% of my firm's annual revenue. "Simone, we know you do excellent work," the board chairman said, his tone apologetic but firm. "But our company has a strict compliance policy regarding vendor reputations. Until these allegations of elder financial abuse are fully investigated and removed from the public domain, we have to temporarily pause our contract. We simply cannot risk the association right now." An hour later, a second major client called to suspend their retainer. In the span of 48 hours, Darius and my parents had managed to inflict massive tangible damage to the empire I had spent my entire adult life building. My career was hanging by an incredibly thin thread. The sheer stress of watching my professional life temporarily crumble was suffocating. My employees were visibly anxious, worried about the future of the firm and their own job security. I gathered my entire team in the main conference room. I did not sugarcoat the situation, and I certainly did not panic. I looked at the talented, dedicated professionals who relied on me. We are experiencing a targeted attack from individuals who are desperate and out of options. I told them, keeping my voice steady and commanding. Do not engage with the reviews. Do not respond to any media inquiries. We will continue to deliver flawless work for the clients who stand by us. We are going to weather this storm, and the people responsible will face severe legal consequences. I projected absolute confidence, but behind closed doors, the pressure was immense. I was fighting a war on two fronts, battling a frivolous lawsuit from my parents and a devastating smear campaign from my brother. They were trying to exhaust me into submission. Late Thursday evening, I was sitting alone in my office. The city lights of Atlanta sparkled outside my windows, a stark contrast to the dark reality playing out on my computer screens. I was working closely with a specialized cybersecurity firm, tracking the IP addresses of the bot farms Darius had hired, building a rock-solid defamation case to present to the authorities. Auntie Viv was simultaneously drafting a blistering response to Warren and Valerie's ridiculous lawsuit. We were meticulously assembling our defense piece by piece. But defense was no longer enough. I needed an offensive strategy. I needed the final fatal mistake that would allow me to end this nightmare permanently. As I was cross-referencing a list of fake review accounts, my personal cell phone buzzed on the desk. It was not a text message or an email. It was a high-priority urgent push notification from my premium credit monitoring application. I picked up the phone and unlocked the screen. The alert flashed brightly, warning me of critical activity regarding my primary credit file. I tapped the notification, feeling a strange cold prickle of anticipation run down my spine. The app opened, displaying a massive red warning banner. A hard inquiry had just been successfully pulled on my social security number. Someone had just used my highly guarded, excellent credit profile to initiate a formal application for a massive commercial bridge loan. I stared at the amount requested on the application details. $500,000. My sharp mind raced, instantly connecting all the dots in real time. Darius was completely bankrupt. His assets were repossessed. Tasha was threatening to leave him. He desperately needed a massive infusion of cash to save his fake startup and keep his materialistic wife from walking out the door. But he had absolutely no credit and no legitimate collateral. He needed a pristine financial profile to secure a loan of that magnitude. He needed my profile. And there was only one person in the world who had unrestricted access to my original birth certificate and my physical social security card from when I was a child: Valerie. My mother had dug through her old files, found my most sensitive personal identification, and handed it directly to her desperate, grifting son. They were not just smearing my name anymore. They had just crossed a massive, unforgivable line. I sat back in my chair, staring at the $500,000 loan application pending on my screen, and a slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. They had just handed me the ultimate key to their absolute and total destruction. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I bypassed the initial consumer alert and dug directly into the back-end data of the credit inquiry. In my line of work, navigating complex financial systems was second nature. It took me less than 3 minutes to pull the origination details of the loan application. The request was submitted to a commercial lender where the approval process relied heavily on automated algorithms. Darius knew exactly what he was doing. He targeted a lender that prioritized speed over thorough verification, hoping the money would hit his account before anyone noticed the discrepancy. But Darius was sloppy. He was arrogant and desperate, a combination that always leaves a digital footprint. I ran a trace on the Internet Protocol address attached to the loan submission. The location pinged back to a luxury apartment complex in downtown Atlanta. He had literally submitted the fraudulent application from his own living room. I downloaded the complete metadata file, securing the digital evidence on an encrypted drive. The standard protocol for any victim of identity theft is immediate action. You call the credit bureaus, you place a hard freeze on your social security number, and you contact the lending institution to flag the application as fraudulent. By doing so, you stop the crime before it happens. But as I sat in my quiet office staring at the glowing monitors, I realized that stopping the crime was the absolute worst thing I could do. If I canceled the application now, Darius would only be guilty of attempted fraud, which was simply not enough punishment for his actions. I did not want to teach my brother a lesson. I wanted to remove him from the board entirely. I wanted a permanent solution to a problem that had plagued my life for decades. To achieve that, I needed Darius to cross the invisible threshold from a minor state-level offense to a massive federal crime. I needed the bank to approve the loan. I needed them to wire the funds. The second that stolen money crossed state lines and landed in his bank account, the jurisdiction would instantly shift to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Auntie Viv. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and alert despite the late hour. I did not waste time with greetings. I told her exactly what Darius had done, how Valerie had supplied my childhood documents, and what I was currently looking at on my screen. I told her I was going to let the application go through. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. When Auntie Viv finally spoke, her tone was deadly serious. "Simone, if you let that wire transfer clear, you are facilitating the completion of a major federal offense," Auntie Viv warned. "The moment he takes possession of those funds using your identity, he is looking at mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. There is no backing out once the federal government gets involved. He will go to federal prison. Are you absolutely certain you are ready to pull that trigger on your own brother?" I looked at the framed photos on my desk, the awards I had earned, the business I had built from nothing. They had declared war on my survival. "I am completely certain," I replied, my voice devoid of hesitation. He made his choice the second he typed my social security number into that form. "Get over here, Auntie Viv. I need my legal counsel present when the trap snaps shut." Auntie Viv arrived at my office building less than 40 minutes later. She strode into my executive suite carrying a fresh pot of coffee and a legal notepad. She locked the glass doors behind her and pulled up a chair next to my desk. We sat in the glow of the monitors, watching the digital status of the commercial bridge loan application. It felt like we were sitting in a high-tech duck blind, patiently waiting for a very specific greedy animal to walk directly into the crosshairs. The automated underwriting system of the commercial lender was functioning exactly as Darius had hoped. We watched as the digital progress bar moved from pending review to conditional approval. Auntie Viv took meticulous notes documenting every timestamp and every system update. We needed an airtight timeline to present to the federal authorities to prove I had zero involvement in the actual origination of the fraudulent loan. "We are entering dangerous territory now," Auntie Viv murmured, sipping her dark coffee. "The bank is generating the final promissory note. He is going to have to digitally sign it using your credentials. This is the point of no return." I kept my eyes locked on the screen. The tension in the room was suffocating. Every passing minute felt like an hour. Darius was sitting in his apartment completely unaware that his brilliant plan to steal $500,000 was being monitored in real time by the exact person he was trying to destroy. He thought this money would solve his problems, win back his materialistic wife, and buy him the time he needed to launch another fraudulent scheme. He was entirely blinded by his own toxic arrogance. At exactly 2:14 in the early morning, the screen refreshed. A bright green banner appeared across the top of the lender portal. The loan had been formally approved. Darius had successfully executed the digital signature, officially committing identity theft and bank fraud. But the trap was not fully sprung yet. We needed the money to move. We needed the wire transfer. "Come on, Darius," I whispered softly to the bright computer screen, my hands gripping the heavy armrests of my leather chair. "Do not get cautious now. Just take the stolen money and run." We waited in silence. The commercial lender operated a 24-hour automated funding system if the routing number had already identified the receiving account. Darius had set up a new corporate account under a fake limited liability company, attempting to distance the stolen funds from his personal banking profile. It was a pathetic attempt at money laundering that any competent forensic accountant would see right through in 10 seconds. At 2:27, the update triggered. The status changed from approved to funded. A digital wire tracking number was generated and attached to the file. The bank had successfully transmitted $500,000 to Darius's fraudulent corporate account. The transaction had crossed state lines utilizing federal banking infrastructure. Auntie Viv slowly set her pen down on the notepad. She let out a long, heavy exhale that seemed to carry the weight of our entire family's toxic history. "It is done," she said quietly. The wire cleared. He just committed interstate wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and money laundering. He just handed you his own head on a silver platter. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the green funded banner. I did not feel guilty. I did not feel conflicted. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of liberation. For my entire life, Warren and Valerie had protected Darius from the consequences of his actions. They shielded him from reality, sacrificed my well-being to ensure his comfort, and blamed everyone else for his spectacular failures. But the real world does not care about Warren's grand speeches at church. The real world does not care about Valerie's fake tears or dramatic performances on my front porch. The federal government operates on cold, hard facts. Darius had finally committed a crime that Warren and Valerie could not shout their way out of. They could not manipulate a federal judge. They were completely powerless. I downloaded the final confirmation documents, the wire tracking numbers, and the digital signature logs. I compiled everything into a secure encrypted folder on my desktop. I labeled the folder with Darius's full legal name and the date. It was a digital coffin, perfectly constructed and ready to be buried. I looked at Auntie Viv. She gave me a firm, resolute nod. We had executed the strategy flawlessly. The defense was officially over. It was time to go on the offensive and burn their entire empire to the ground. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my curated list of professional contacts. As a corporate financial consultant, I frequently collaborated with government agencies to investigate corporate fraud. I had direct lines to the people who handled financial crimes of this magnitude. I tapped the screen and initiated the first call to my contact at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. As the line began to ring, I pulled up the secondary contact for the Internal Revenue Service. The trap had successfully snapped shut, and now it was time to unleash the hounds. I quickly dialed the direct line to a senior agent I had worked with during a massive corporate embezzlement case 2 years prior. He picked up immediately, his voice sharp and alert. I calmly explained that my identity had been stolen to secure a $500,000 commercial bridge loan and that the funds had just crossed state lines via an automated wire transfer. I provided the specific tracking numbers, the exact internet protocol addresses, and the routing information for his fraudulent shell company. The agent asked if I wanted them to freeze the destination account right away to prevent capital flight. I told him no. I wanted them to build a comprehensive, bulletproof federal indictment. I told him to track exactly how the stolen money was spent, because I knew my arrogant brother was about to leave a paper trail so wide and obvious a blind man could follow it. I emphasized that Darius was operating a scheme targeting vulnerable family members. The agent took down every single detail. He assured me they would run a parallel investigation with the IRS Criminal Division to ensure no stone was left unturned. We hung up, and Auntie Viv poured us both another cup of dark coffee. The trap was officially set, but patience was going to be my most lethal weapon. For exactly 21 agonizing days, I went completely dark. I did not return phone calls from mutual acquaintances. I did not respond to the ridiculous lawsuit my parents had filed. My corporate legal team filed a standard extension buying us crucial time while giving Warren and Valerie the absolute false impression that I was scrambling for a defense. To them, my strategic silence sounded like total defeat. They truly believed they had pushed me into a corner and that my consulting firm was crumbling under the weight of their malicious online smear campaign. They thought they had won the war. Darius, armed with $500,000 of freshly stolen federal funds, wasted absolutely no time pretending to be a self-made titan of industry. Instead of attempting to actually build the software company he claimed to have, he immediately reverted to his most toxic materialistic habits. He used the stolen bridge loan to fund a disgustingly lavish lifestyle upgrade. He marched straight into a high-end jeweler in Buckhead and purchased a massive, flawless diamond ring for Tasha. The shiny new rock was exactly the bribe she needed to forget about his Miami mistress, the repossessed cars, and the public humiliation. Tasha proudly flaunted the ring all over social media, boasting about her husband's incredible financial comeback. They abandoned their previous apartment and signed a lease on a sprawling top-floor luxury penthouse in Midtown Atlanta. Darius was burning through the stolen cash at an astonishing rate, prepaying a year of exorbitant rent to bypass the standard credit checks he would have inevitably failed. He leased a brand new imported sports car and started hosting lavish dinners at exclusive steakhouses every single night. In his mind, he was an untouchable tech genius who had successfully outsmarted the system, his little sister, and the entire banking industry. He had absolutely no idea that federal investigators were meticulously logging every single one of his luxury purchases, preparing to use his own credit card receipts to put him behind bars for the next decade. Warren and Valerie were equally intoxicated by this sudden fraudulent wealth. Darius had moved them out of their cheap roadside motel and set them up in a rented luxury condo overlooking the city skyline. My parents were completely blinded by the illusion of success. They did not ask how Darius had magically secured hundreds of thousands of dollars just days after his accounts were entirely frozen. They just eagerly accepted the penthouse views, the catered meals, and the designer clothes he bought them to keep them compliant and quiet. Their arrogance reached a sickening peak during the third week of my silence. I was sitting at my kitchen island at the lake house when Chloe, my assistant, sent me a link to a public social media broadcast. Valerie and Warren were streaming live on Facebook to all their church friends, extended family members, and the same community they had tried to turn against me. Valerie was sitting on a white leather sofa, holding a crystal glass of expensive champagne, wearing a brand new silk dress. Warren stood behind her looking smug and victorious. They were putting on a sickeningly sweet performance for their audience. God always blesses the faithful, Valerie told the camera, her voice dripping with artificial humility. Our brilliant son Darius just secured massive funding for his tech company. He is about to launch a historic corporate merger that will change our family legacy forever. We are just so blessed that he takes such good care of his parents after others turn their backs on us. Warren leaned into the frame, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. We always knew who the real talent in this family was, he boasted loudly. Some people try to build wealth through greed and selfishness, but true success comes to those who honor their elders. Our son is untouchable now. We are entering a new season of abundance, and very soon we will be reclaiming what rightfully belongs to this family. I watched the broadcast with a perfectly calm, icy demeanor. They were publicly digging their own graves. Every word they spoke on that video was another piece of evidence confirming they were willingly benefiting from the proceeds of a massive federal crime. They were so utterly obsessed with respectability and public perception that they were broadcasting their complicity to the entire world. The very next morning, a courier arrived at the security gate of my Lake Oconee property. He handed over a thick, heavy envelope made of expensive textured paper. The seal on the back was pressed in shiny gold wax. I took the envelope to my kitchen counter and sliced it open with a letter opener. Inside was a lavishly printed formal invitation to a corporate event. Darius was hosting a massive investors' gala at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in downtown Atlanta. The invitation promised an evening of opulent champagne and an exclusive presentation regarding his highly anticipated tech merger. He had invited local politicians, prominent business owners, and the wealthy elite of Atlanta's social scene. He was using the stolen bridge loan to throw a massive party, hoping to use the event to lure actual investors into his fraudulent web and steal even more money to cover his tracks. But the invitation was not just a formality. Tucked inside the gold-foiled card was a handwritten note on personalized stationery. I recognized my father's sharp, aggressive handwriting immediately. Warren had taken the time to write me a petty, venomous message. It read, "Come see what real success looks like. We will be announcing the legal seizure of your lake property tonight in front of everyone who matters. You are going to hand over those keys exactly like I told you to. Failures do not get to dictate terms to this family." I read the handwritten note twice. Warren was actually planning to use his son, fake corporate gala, to publicly humiliate me again. He thought the threat of a public spectacle at the Ritz-Carlton would force me to surrender my home and my consulting firm to avoid further embarrassment. He wanted to break my spirit in a room full of Atlanta's most powerful people. I did not feel angry. I felt an overwhelming sense of profound anticipation. They had perfectly set the stage for their own total destruction. They wanted a captive audience. They wanted high stakes. They wanted to make a public announcement about real estate acquisitions and corporate takeovers. I was more than happy to give them exactly what they asked for. I walked into my master closet and selected my sharpest, most intimidating designer gown. It was a tailored emerald green silk dress that projected absolute power and unwavering authority. I paired it with my most expensive heels and minimal, elegant jewelry. I looked in the full-length. The woman staring back at me was not a victim. She was an apex predator who had patiently waited for the perfect moment to strike. I walked back to my home office and picked up my slim leather briefcase. Inside, I carefully placed the forensic handwriting analysis, the offshore wire transfer receipts, the identity theft documentation, and a few newly acquired legal documents that Warren and Valerie had absolutely no idea existed. The trap was fully loaded. I picked up my phone and opened my text messages. I typed a quick, precise message to Auntie Viv. "I have the invitation. The dress code is formal and the guest list is packed. Make sure our friends at the Federal Bureau are fully briefed on the timeline. I will see you at the hotel." For exactly 21 days, I completely vanished from their radar. I did not return phone calls from mutual acquaintances who wanted to gossip. I did not respond to the ridiculous lawsuit my parents had filed. My corporate legal team simply submitted a standard extension request to the court, buying us crucial time while giving Warren and Valerie the absolute false impression that I was scrambling for a defense. To them, my strategic silence sounded like total defeat. They truly believed they had pushed me into a corner and that my consulting firm was crumbling under the weight of their malicious online smear campaign. They thought they had won the war. Darius, armed with $500,000 of freshly stolen federal funds, wasted absolutely no time pretending to be a self-made titan of industry. Instead of attempting to actually build the software company he claimed to have, he immediately reverted to his most toxic materialistic habits. He used the stolen bridge loan to fund a disgustingly lavish lifestyle upgrade. He marched straight into a high-end jeweler in Buckhead and purchased a massive, flawless diamond ring for Tasha. The shiny new rock was exactly the bribe she needed to forget about his Miami mistress, the repossessed cars, and the public humiliation they had suffered in my office. Tasha proudly flaunted the ring all over social media, boasting about her husband's incredible financial comeback. They abandoned their previous apartment and signed a lease on a sprawling top-floor luxury penthouse in Midtown Atlanta. Darius was burning through the stolen cash at an astonishing rate, prepaying a year of exorbitant rent to bypass the standard credit checks. He would have inevitably failed. He leased a brand-new imported sports car and started hosting lavish dinners at exclusive steakhouses every single night. In his mind, he was an untouchable tech genius who had successfully outsmarted the system, his little sister, and the entire banking industry. He had absolutely no idea that federal investigators were meticulously logging every single one of his luxury purchases, preparing to use his own credit card receipts to put him behind bars for the next decade. Warren and Valerie were equally intoxicated by this sudden fraudulent wealth. Darius had moved them out of their cheap roadside motel and set them up in a rented luxury condo overlooking the city skyline. My parents were completely blinded by the illusion of success. They did not ask how Darius had magically secured hundreds of thousands of dollars just days after his accounts were entirely frozen. They just eagerly accepted the penthouse views, the catered meals, and the designer clothes he bought them to keep them compliant and quiet. Their arrogance reached a sickening peak during the third week of my silence. I was sitting at my kitchen island at the lake house when Chloe, my assistant, sent me a link to a public social media broadcast. Valerie and Warren were streaming live on Facebook to all their church friends, extended family members, and the same community they had tried to turn against me. Valerie was sitting on a white leather sofa holding a crystal glass of expensive champagne, wearing a brand new silk dress. Warren stood behind her, looking smug and victorious. They were putting on a sickeningly sweet performance for their audience. God always blesses the faithful, Valerie told the camera, her voice dripping with artificial humility. Our brilliant son, Darius, just secured massive funding for his tech company. He is about to launch a historic corporate merger that will change our family legacy forever. We are just so blessed that he takes such good care of his parents after others turn their backs on us. Warren leaned into the frame, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. We always knew who the real talent in this family was. He boasted loudly. Some people try to build wealth through greed and selfishness, but true success comes to those who honor their elders. Our son is untouchable now. We are entering a new season of abundance, and very soon, we will be reclaiming what rightfully belongs to this family. I watched the broadcast with a perfectly calm, icy demeanor. They were publicly digging their own graves. Every word they spoke on that video was another piece of evidence confirming they were willingly benefiting from the proceeds of a massive federal crime. They were so utterly obsessed with respectability and public perception that they were broadcasting their complicity to the entire world, documenting their own downfall in real time for everyone to see. The very next morning, a private courier arrived at the security gate of my Lake Oconee property. He handed over a thick, heavy envelope made of expensive textured paper. The seal on the back was pressed in shiny gold wax. I took the elegant envelope to my kitchen counter and sliced it open with a silver letter opener. Inside was a lavishly printed, highly formal invitation to a corporate event. Darius was hosting a massive investors' gala at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in downtown Atlanta. The invitation promised an evening of unparalleled opulence, expensive champagne, and an exclusive presentation regarding his highly anticipated tech merger. He had invited local politicians, prominent business owners, and the wealthy elite of Atlanta's high society social scene. I was clearly using the stolen bridge loan to throw a massive party, hoping to use the high-profile event to lure actual wealthy investors into his fraudulent web and steal even more money to permanently cover his tracks. But the invitation was not just a basic formality. Tucked inside the gold-foiled card was a handwritten note on personalized stationery. I recognized my father's sharp, aggressive handwriting immediately. Warren had taken the time to write me a petty, venomous message. It read, "Come see what real success looks like. We will be announcing the legal seizure of your lake property tonight in front of everyone who matters. You are going to hand over those keys exactly like I told you to. Failures do not get to dictate terms to this family." I read the handwritten note twice, letting the sheer audacity of his words sink in. Warren was actually planning to use his son's fake corporate gala to publicly humiliate me again. He thought the threat of a massive public spectacle at the Ritz-Carlton would completely force me to surrender my home and my consulting firm to avoid further embarrassment. He wanted to break my spirit in a room full of Atlanta's most powerful people. I did not feel angry. I felt an overwhelming sense of profound anticipation. They had perfectly set the stage for their own total destruction. They wanted a captive audience. They wanted high stakes. They wanted to make a public announcement about real estate acquisitions and corporate takeovers. I was more than happy to give them exactly what they asked for in dramatic fashion. I walked into my expansive master closet and meticulously selected my sharpest, most intimidating designer gown. It was a perfectly tailored emerald green silk dress that projected absolute power and unwavering authority. I paired it with my most expensive heels and minimal, elegant jewelry. I looked in the full-length mirror. The woman staring back at me was not a victim. Cowering in fear, she was an apex predator who had patiently waited for the perfect moment to strike her enemies. I walked back to my home office and picked up my slim black leather briefcase. Inside, I carefully placed the certified forensic handwriting analysis, the offshore wire transfer receipts, the irrefutable identity theft documentation, and a few newly acquired legal documents that Warren and Valerie had absolutely no idea existed. The trap was fully loaded and ready to be completely unleashed. I picked up my phone and opened my text messages. I typed a quick, precise message to Auntie Viv, knowing she would be just as eager as I was to see this through to the absolute bitter end. I have the formal invitation in hand. The dress code is strict, and the guest list is packed. Make sure our trusted friends at the Federal Bureau are fully briefed on the exact timeline. I will see you at the luxury hotel tonight. The feds are in position. It is showtime. I grabbed my car keys and walked out the heavy front door, securely locking the deadbolt behind me. The cool evening breeze carried the faint scent of pine trees and fresh lake water, a stark contrast to the stifling toxicity my family tried to force into my life. I slid into the driver's seat of my pristine vehicle, the powerful engine roaring to life with a satisfying growl. As I navigated the winding roads toward the highway, I felt an incredible sense of clarity. For decades, they demanded my submission, mistaking my quiet diligence for weakness. Tonight, I was going to teach them a final lesson. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator and sped directly toward the glowing city skyline. The glowing city skyline soon gave way to the towering facade of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in downtown Atlanta. Valets rushed to open the doors of my vehicle as I stepped out into the humid night air. I handed over my keys and walked through the revolving glass doors with the supreme confidence of a woman who held every single winning card. The grand ballroom was located on the second floor, and the faint sound of a string quartet echoed down the marble hallway. I paused briefly in the opulent foyer to check my reflection in a gilded mirror. My emerald green silk gown draped flawlessly, projecting absolute power. I gripped my slim black leather briefcase, took a deep breath, and pushed open the heavy double doors. The scene inside the ballroom was dripping in unearned opulence. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over Atlanta's wealthy elite. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with silver trays of champagne flutes and expensive hors d'oeuvres. Near the center of the room, a towering champagne fountain bubbled over. Darius was holding court by the bar, wearing a bespoke tuxedo he had undoubtedly purchased with stolen federal funds. He was aggressively pitching his fake startup to a group of older, unsuspecting investors, flashing his charismatic smile and waving his hands to emphasize his completely fabricated business projections. Tasha stood right beside him, her newly acquired flawless diamond ring sparkling under the chandelier lights as she laughed at jokes she barely understood. I stepped further into the room, my presence instantly shifting the atmospheric pressure. I looked breathtaking and utterly unbothered. Heads turned as I glided across the plush carpet. Valerie was standing near the front stage, draped in a tasteless sequined gown. She caught sight of me, and her haughty smile immediately curdled into a vicious sneer. She leaned over to a prominent church elder standing beside her and loudly whispered that I was only there to beg my brother for a job after ruining my own consulting firm. I ignored her completely. I did not break my stride. I simply offered her a cold, empty smile and took a position near the center aisle, directly in the line of sight of the main stage. A sudden chime rang through the ballroom speakers, signaling the start of the evening's main presentation. The string quartet stopped playing, and the guests directed their attention toward the raised platform at the front of the room. Two massive projector screens flanked the stage, currently displaying the sleek modern logo of Darius's entirely fake tech company. Warren walked up the carpeted stairs to the stage. He adjusted his expensive silk tie and grabbed the microphone from the stand. He looked out over the sea of wealthy investors and prominent socialites, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride. "Ladies and gentlemen," Warren began, his deep voice carrying a sickeningly sweet tone of manufactured humility. Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate the incredible launch of my son's visionary technology merger. Family resilience is the absolute foundation of everything we do. We have faced immense trials. We have had certain family members try to tear us down out of petty jealousy and spite. He paused for dramatic effect, locking his cold, unforgiving eyes directly on me, standing in the center of the crowd. A few guests followed his gaze, looking at me with uncomfortable curiosity. But justice always prevails. Warren continued, raising his voice to ensure every single person in the room heard him clearly. True success cannot be stopped by selfish individuals. Tonight, we are not just celebrating a corporate merger. We are announcing a major real estate acquisition. Tomorrow morning, our family will be officially taking ownership of a premier Lake Oconee estate. It is a testament to what happens when you honor your family and stay true to your roots. The crowd offered polite, scattered applause. Warren smiled down at me, his eyes gleaming with malicious victory. He firmly believed he had completely cornered me. He thought the intense social pressure of this elite gathering would force me to surrender my property to avoid a public scene. He was wrong. The polite applause was suddenly interrupted by a harsh, loud burst of static feedback. The massive projector screens behind Warren aggressively glitched. The sleek startup logo fractured into jagged pixels and completely vanished. The upbeat presentation music that had just begun to play abruptly cut out, plunging the grand ballroom into total deafening silence. The only sound left in the massive room was the sharp, rhythmic clicking of my heels against the polished hardwood floor. I walked straight down the center aisle, my eyes locked dead on my father. The crowd parted for me, instinctively sensing the dangerous electric shift in the atmosphere. Warren's smug smile evaporated. He took a nervous step backward as I reached the stage. I did not wait for an invitation. I walked right up the carpeted stairs, stepped up to the podium, and smoothly took the microphone right out of his stunned, trembling hand. My father absolutely loves talking about real estate acquisitions, I said into the microphone, my calm, authoritative voice echoing through the silent ballroom. He loves talking about family resilience and justice, so I think it is only fair that we look at the actual legal paperwork tonight. Let us look at the real numbers, shall we? I opened my slim black leather briefcase and pulled out a small remote control. I pointed it directly at the audio-visual booth in the back of the room and pressed the primary button. The massive projector screens behind me flashed brilliantly back to life. But they were no longer displaying a tech company logo. They were displaying high-definition, crystal-clear images of legal documents. On the left screen, rendered in massive, bold text, was an official foreclosure notice. On the right screen was a finalized auction deed. A collective gasp rippled through the wealthy crowd as they leaned in to read the names printed on the legal documents. Warren turned around to look at the screens. His jaw dropped. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. Valerie let out a high-pitched shriek from the front row, dropping her champagne flute. The glass shattered sharply against the floor. You see, my parents thought they were cleverly suing me to take my home, I announced to the captivated audience, projecting my voice with absolute unwavering certainty. They stood in church and told everyone I made them homeless. But the truth is, they made themselves homeless. They secretly mortgaged their ancestral family home to the absolute maximum limit to fund my brother's fraudulent lifestyle. They defaulted on that massive loan. And that foreclosure notice on the screen is not for my lake house. It is for their luxury condo. I pressed the remote again. The screens transitioned to a new set of highly sensitive legal documents. These were official court-ordered repossession warrants. And my brother, the brilliant tech visionary, hosting this lovely gala. I continued gesturing gracefully toward Darius, who was frozen in absolute terror by the bar. He did not use his investment capital to build software. He used it to buy a luxury yacht in Miami for his 22-year-old mistress. And those repossession warrants on the screen right now are for that exact yacht, along with his leased sports cars and his frozen bank accounts. Tasha let out a guttural, horrifying scream. She turned and stared at Darius, her eyes wide with pure, unadulterated madness. The crowd began to murmur loudly, the wealthy investors quickly realizing they were attending a party hosted by a desperate con artist. I turned my body to fully face Warren and Valerie. They looked completely broken, entirely stripped of the arrogant facade they had worn for decades. "You thought you could sue me into submission," I said, my voice dropping to a chilling, localized tone that still carried through the microphone. "You thought you could bleed me dry. But while you were wasting time with a bottom-feeding lawyer, the bank officially auctioned off your toxic defaulted debt. And the private equity firm that bought your debt for pennies on the dollar is mine." I stepped closer to my father, who was physically shaking on the stage. "I am the sole owner of your debt, Warren," I declared, sealing their absolute doom. "I am your landlord. And as of this morning, you are officially evicted. You have absolutely nothing left." The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. Investors were frantically pulling out their phones, making calls to their financial advisors. Tasha was screaming at Darius, hitting him in the chest with her expensive evening bag. Valerie collapsed into a nearby chair, hyperventilating and clutching her chest. Darius suddenly snapped out of his paralyzed state. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged fury. He shoved past a group of panicked guests and sprinted toward the stage. He lunged forward, stopping just at the bottom of the stairs, his eyes wild and bloodshot. "You are lying!" Darius screamed at the top of his lungs, pointing a desperate, shaking finger at me. "You are just a jealous, bitter liar. I am not bankrupt. I have $500,000 sitting in my corporate account right now. I can buy you out tonight. I can buy your stupid lake house and your entire consulting firm. I have the cash." I looked down at my older brother, the golden child who had finally dug a grave so deep he could never climb out. I slowly shook my head, offering him a smile devoid of any warmth or mercy. "That is not your money, Darius," I said smoothly, my voice cutting through his hysterical screaming. "That is stolen money. You committed identity theft using my social security number to secure a fraudulent commercial bridge loan. You committed interstate wire fraud when you transferred those funds." Darius froze, the color draining from his face just as it had from our father's. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He slowly realized the catastrophic magnitude of the mistake he had made. And Darius Reyes continued, gesturing elegantly toward the heavy mahogany doors at the very back of the grand ballroom. "Those men in the dark suits standing by the exits. They are not late-arriving investors." Darius slowly turned his head to look at the back of the room. The crowd parted, revealing a dozen stern-faced individuals wearing tactical vests over their dress shirts. The gold lettering on their jackets was impossible to miss. FBI and IRS Criminal Investigation Division. The trap had entirely closed. Darius stared at the federal agents. His arrogant, meticulously crafted world was instantly reduced to absolute rubble. The staggering realization that he was not a mastermind, but simply a pawn. In my counterstrike broke his mind. He took a stumbling step backward, his breath coming in short, erratic gasps. He looked at the massive projector screens displaying his financial ruin, then looked at the federal agents securing all the exits, and finally looked back up at me, standing triumphantly on the stage. Warren fell to his knees on the carpeted platform. The proud, domineering patriarch who had physically shoved me into the rain was now weeping openly in front of Atlanta's elite. He reached out with a trembling hand, grabbing the hem of my emerald silk gown. "Simone, please," Warren begged, his voice a pathetic, broken whisper. "You cannot do this to your own brother. You cannot do this to your parents. We will lose everything. They will lock him away. Please, you have to tell them it was a misunderstanding. You have to save us." I looked down at the man who had tormented me for my entire life. I looked at Valerie weeping uncontrollably in the front row, and Darius completely paralyzed by his impending federal prison sentence. I slowly stepped back, pulling the hem of my dress out of his desperate grasp. I looked down at them with absolute freezing ice in my veins. "You made your choices," I replied softly, ensuring only he could hear my final verdict. "You are going to have to live with them." I turned my back on my father, closed my black leather briefcase, and prepared to watch the federal authorities dismantle the rest of their pathetic lives. The heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom did not just open. They burst inward with a violent, thunderous crash that shattered the remaining tension in the room. A swarm of tactical boots hit the polished hardwood floor. Dozens of federal agents flooded into the opulent space. Half of them wore dark windbreakers, with prominent yellow lettering spelling out FBI across their backs. The other half bore the insignia of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The sheer volume of law enforcement personnel was overwhelming. They moved with swift, practiced precision, fanning out to secure every single exit. The wealthy investors, socialites, and local politicians who had gathered to celebrate my brother's fake tech empire instantly realized they were standing in the middle of a massive federal raid. Absolute panic erupted across the room. Guests screamed, dropping their expensive champagne flutes as they scrambled to back away from the center of the ballroom. The string quartet had abandoned their instruments and were huddled near the catering tables. The illusion of high society luxury was completely obliterated by the harsh, uncompromising reality of federal law enforcement. Nobody moved the lead. FBI agent shouted, his authoritative voice cutting through the hysterical screams of the crowd. Keep your hands visible and step away from the stage area immediately. This is a federal operation. The sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos parted instantly. Atlanta's elite scrambled to distance themselves from Darius, treating him like a highly contagious disease. In the corporate world, being caught in the crossfire of a federal financial raid was career suicide. Nobody wanted their face captured on the hotel security cameras standing next to a man about to be indicted for wire fraud. A tactical team of 6 heavily armed agents marched straight down the center aisle, their eyes locked entirely on my brother. Darius was still standing near the bottom of the stage stairs, completely paralyzed by a combination of profound terror and absolute disbelief. The smug, arrogant tech founder, who had tried to steal my life savings just weeks prior, was now trembling so violently his knees were buckling. Darius Anderson, the lead agent, announced, stepping onto the carpeted platform and pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. You are under arrest for multiple violations of federal law. You are being charged with interstate wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and tax evasion. The words echoed through the massive ballroom, cementing his permanent destruction. Every single person in the room heard the specific, devastating charges. There was no spinning this narrative. There was no public relations campaign that could erase the fact that Darius was a common thief. I do not understand. Darius stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine. I am a tech founder. I have venture capital. There is a misunderstanding. You have the wrong man. My sister set me up. The lead agent did not even blink at his desperate, fabricated excuses. Turn around and place your hands behind your back right now, the agent commanded, his tone leaving zero room for negotiation. Darius tried to take a step backward, looking frantically around the room for any possible escape route. 2 younger agents immediately grabbed him by the shoulders, forcefully spinning him around and slamming him face first onto the polished stage floor. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and a collective gasp rose from the terrified crowd. The sharp, unmistakable sound of metal ratcheting shut echoed loudly as they secured the handcuffs tightly around his wrists, binding him to the harsh reality of his own making. You have the right to remain silent, the lead agent recited loudly, ensuring the entire audience could hear the reading of his Miranda rights. Every single syllable struck like a hammer against the fragile glass house Darius had built. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. While the federal agents hauled Darius up from the floor, a piercing, hysterical shriek tore through the silence of the ballroom. It was Tasha. She had been standing frozen near the bar, clutching her counterfeit luxury handbag and staring at the unfolding disaster. The terrifying reality of her situation had finally broken through her thick layer of materialistic delusion. The massive diamond ring on her finger was purchased with stolen federal funds. The luxury penthouse she had just leased was tied to money laundering. The expensive sports cars, the designer clothes, and the lavish dinners were all financed by interstate wire fraud. The federal government was going to seize absolutely everything she owned, and she was likely going to be named as an unindicted co-conspirator. Tasha completely lost her mind. The polished, arrogant persona she used to mock me in my office was entirely gone. She transformed into a frantic, cornered animal. She ripped the heavy diamond necklace from her throat, breaking the clasp, and hurled it forcefully at Darius. She aggressively yanked the massive engagement ring off her finger and threw it onto the stage, the stone bouncing off the hardwood floor with a sharp clatter that seemed to emphasize the finality of their broken union. "You ruined my life!" Tasha screamed at the top of her lungs, her face twisted in an ugly, unhinged display of pure fury. "You told me you were a billionaire. You told me we were untouchable. You dragged me into a federal crime, you pathetic lying loser. I trusted you to provide for me to elevate my status, and instead you used me as a prop while you chased after Instagram models in Miami. I am going to lose everything because of you." Darius struggled against the grip of the federal agents, his face flushed with extreme humiliation. "Tasha, baby, please," he begged frantically. "Do not do this right now. Call my lawyer. Call the bank. I am not calling anyone for you." Tasha shrieked, stomping her designer heel against the floor. "I am filing for divorce tomorrow morning. I hope you rot in federal prison for the rest of your miserable life." Two agents stepped forward to de-escalate her violent outburst, gently but firmly guiding her away from the stage. She did not fight them. She just kept screaming obscenities at her husband as the authorities escorted him toward the main exit. The spectacular collapse of my brother's fraudulent empire was perfectly executed. But the final, most satisfying act of justice belonged entirely to my parents. Warren was still kneeling on the stage, completely broken. The proud, domineering patriarch who had physically shoved me into the freezing rain was now sobbing openly in front of his wealthy peers. But Valerie was not ready to surrender. As I picked up my briefcase and turned to walk down the stage stairs, Valerie lunged forward from the front row. She threw herself onto the carpeted steps, physically blocking my path. Her carefully styled hair was a messy, disheveled disaster. Her sequined gown was wrinkled, and her face was streaked with dark mascara tears. She reached out with both hands and aggressively grabbed the hem of my emerald green silk dress, holding onto the fabric with a desperate, suffocating grip that mirrored the way she had tried to hold onto my finances. "Simone, please," Valerie wailed, her voice cracking with absolute raw desperation. "You cannot do this to us. You cannot just walk away. The bank is going to take our condo tomorrow. The feds are taking our son. We have absolutely zero money left. We will be living on the street. You are our daughter. You have to save us. We are family, Simone. You cannot just turn your back on your own blood when we are suffering. You have to drop the charges and give us a place to stay." I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life telling me I was selfish. I looked at the mother who had eagerly handed my sensitive childhood documents over to a criminal just so he could steal $500,000 under my name. She was begging me for mercy while standing in the exact same hotel where she had planned to publicly humiliate me and steal my home. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. The emotional manipulation that used to bind me to them had been completely severed. I looked down at Valerie with absolute freezing ice in my veins. I slowly and deliberately stepped backward, pulling the fine silk fabric of my gown forcefully out of her frantic, clutching hands. I smoothed the front of my dress, ensuring my posture was absolutely flawless. I looked at Valerie, then at Warren, ensuring they both heard my final, unwavering verdict. "Failures do not belong in my house," I said smoothly, throwing the exact same toxic words they had used against me right back into their faces. "Figure it out." I turned my back on them for the final time. I walked gracefully down the center aisle of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, my head held high, my briefcase securely in my hand. The crowd of wealthy investors and prominent socialites parted from me with profound, undeniable respect, their eyes tracking my every movement as if I were royalty. Several guests had their smartphones out, camera flashes illuminating my path as I walked toward the heavy mahogany doors. Behind me, the sound of my mother's agonizing, despairing sobs echoed through the massive room, completely drowned out by the harsh, commanding orders of the federal agents securing the crime scene. I did not look back. I stepped out into the warm Atlanta night air, handed my ticket to the valet, and waited for my car. The oppressive humidity of the city felt entirely refreshing against my skin. The war was officially over, and I had emerged as the undisputed, untouchable victor. My empire was entirely secure, and my future was completely my own. I watched the bright red taillights of my sleek vehicle approach the grand entrance, feeling a profound, comforting sense of absolute peace settling deep into my bones. The venomous toxic roots of my broken family tree had finally been permanently severed, allowing me the precious space to flourish and grow without their heavy, continuously suffocating shadow blocking my radiant light. I stepped gracefully into the luxurious leather interior, closing the door firmly on the chaotic chapter of my past. I was no longer the neglected scapegoat forced to endlessly sacrifice my hard-earned happiness. I was the brilliant, unapologetic, unyielding architect of my own beautiful, flawless, immaculate destiny, finally ready to conquer the entire world. 3 months later, the dust had completely settled over the ruins of my family's fabricated empire. The federal justice system moves with a slow but absolutely merciless efficiency when interstate wire fraud and identity theft are involved. The brilliant tech founder who had stood in the center of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, sipping expensive champagne and pitching phantom mergers, was now wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. Darius was denied bail entirely. The federal judge deemed him an extreme flight risk given the offshore accounts and the sheer audacity of his crimes. His high-priced defense attorney abandoned him. The second the retainer check bounced, resulting in Darius relying on an overworked public defender who advised him to take a plea deal. He was officially sentenced to 8 years in federal prison with absolutely no possibility of early parole. The reality of his confinement broke him completely. He went from leasing luxury sports cars and buying yachts in Miami to counting the minutes in a concrete cell stripped of every single illusion he had ever created to make himself feel superior. I was finally forced to face the exact man he truly was underneath the bespoke suits and the stolen money. A coward. Tasha did not stand by her man. The moment the federal agents hauled Darius off the stage, she recognized that the designer gravy train had permanently derailed. She filed for divorce the very next morning, hoping to legally distance herself from the radioactive fallout of his massive federal indictment. But walking away from the marriage did not absolve her from the crushing reality of their shared financial ruin. The government seized absolutely everything they owned. The counterfeit luxury handbags, the diamond engagement ring, the imported cars, and the luxury penthouse were all liquidated to pay back the commercial lender. Tasha was left with less than zero. Stripped of her arrogant vanity and her fake socialite status, she was forced to face the brutal consequences of enabling a grifter. The woman who had marched into my executive suite demanding the keys to my Porsche was now working the late shift at a fast food drive-thru on the outskirts of Atlanta. Instead of wearing tailored silk blouses and expensive heels, she wore a stained polyester uniform and a plastic visor, handing out paper bags of greasy food to impatient commuters. Her country club dreams had dissolved into the smell of cheap frying oil and minimum wage reality. For Warren and Valerie, the fall from grace was even more devastating because they had further to drop. The private equity firm I owned executed the eviction process with cold clinical precision. They were legally removed from the luxury condo Darius had rented for them. Since they had secretly mortgaged their ancestral family home and handed the equity to my brother, they had absolutely nowhere to go. They were completely destitute. The proud image-obsessed parents, who had spent their entire lives judging others and demanding absolute respect, were forced to pack whatever meager belongings they had left into cheap cardboard boxes. They moved into a cramped, low-income studio apartment in a notoriously rough neighborhood, far away from the manicured lawns and gated communities they believed they deserved. The financial ruin was terrible, but the social death was what truly broke their spirits. Warren and Valerie had built their entire identities around respectability politics. They thrived on the admiration of their peers and the prominent standing they held at Greater Hope Fellowship. But Auntie Viv had ensured the truth was permanently carved into the bedrock of our community. When my parents tried to reach out to their wealthy friends for financial help or a temporary place to stay, they were met with dead silence. The prominent deacons, who had comforted Valerie in the front pew, now refused to acknowledge her existence. Their country club associates, their church friends, and their extended family members entirely blocked their phone numbers. They were completely and permanently shunned. They had traded their dignity, their morality, and their only loyal daughter to protect a criminal, and the community responded by erasing them from high society forever. They were left to sit in their tiny, sweltering studio apartment, with nothing but the crushing, unbearable silence of their own consequences. Meanwhile, my life flourished in the absence of their heavy, suffocating toxicity. The cyber smear campaign against my consulting firm had been swiftly dismantled. Once the federal indictment against Darius became public record, I provided the documentation to my corporate clients, proving beyond any doubt that the horrific reviews were part of a malicious extortion attempt. The executive boards that had paused my contracts immediately reinstated them, issuing formal apologies for doubting my integrity. My firm expanded, securing 2 new multinational accounts and breaking our previous revenue records. The storm had not destroyed my foundation. It had washed away the dirt and left the bedrock stronger than ever before. The true healing, however, did not happen in the boardroom. It happened at the lake house. The scene shifted to a perfectly serene, sunlit Sunday morning on the expansive wooden deck of my Lake Oconee property. The harsh torrential rain that had battered the windows months ago was a distant memory, replaced by the gentle, calming sound of water lapping against the private dock. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and a warm, gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of blooming magnolia trees. I was hosting a beautiful, stress-free brunch for the people who had proven their loyalty when it mattered most. Auntie Viv sat at the head of the long outdoor dining table, looking radiant and relaxed in a flowing yellow sundress. She was holding a crystal glass of fresh mimosa, laughing loudly at a joke made by Chloe, my brilliant assistant who had bravely stood her ground during the office ambush. The table was filled with loyal colleagues, genuine friends, and the chosen family who respected my boundaries and celebrated my authentic success. There were no tense interrogations about my personal life. There were no backhanded compliments or cruel comparisons. There was only genuine warmth, mutual respect, and the profound, uplifting joy of being surrounded by people who loved me for exactly who I was. I walked out of the kitchen carrying a large silver tray of fresh pastries and set it down in the center of the table. The conversation flowed easily, a beautiful symphony of joy and shared triumph. I poured myself a cup of dark coffee and leaned against the wooden railing of the deck, letting the warm sunlight wash over my face. I looked at the people laughing around my table and realized the most valuable asset I owned was not the real estate portfolio or the corporate consulting firm. It was the absolute unbreakable peace of mind I had fought so hard to secure. I turned my gaze outward, looking over the pristine, sparkling water of the lake. The journey had been incredibly difficult, fraught with deep betrayals and painful realizations. For 32 years, I had carried the heavy, unfair burden of trying to be the perfect daughter for parents who only valued me for what they could extract from my success. They had demanded my submission. They had tried to steal my wealth. They had attempted to ruin my career and drag my name through the mud to save a brother who viewed me as nothing more than an automated teller machine. They had pushed me to the absolute brink, believing that my commitment to family would override my instinct for survival. They thought I would quietly absorb their abuse to maintain the fragile, toxic illusion of our family legacy. They vastly underestimated the strength forged in the fires of their constant rejection. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling a profound sense of closure settle permanently into my heart. The scales were finally balanced. The debts were fully paid. The toxic roots were severed, and I was blooming in the light of my own independence. I took a sip of my coffee, the rich flavor grounding me in the beautiful present moment. They thought they could break me to build themselves up, I whispered softly to the gentle morning breeze, watching a heron glide gracefully across the surface of the clear blue water. They thought they could manipulate the system and use guilt as a weapon to take everything I had worked my entire life to achieve. They gambled their home, their reputation, and their freedom on the arrogant assumption that I would simply surrender. But they forgot one crucial detail. They forgot that I am the one who knows how to do the math. And the math finally caught up with them, bringing them exactly the absolute ruin they completely deserved. I turned around and walked back toward the joyous laughter radiating from my table, leaving the toxic ghosts of my past permanently buried in the dust. My future was beautiful, bright, and entirely mine.